The Orpheus Silex Turntable, invented in the 1950s by George Leonard Morgan of Melbourne, Australia. It is perhaps a unicorn amongst Australian-made turntables of this quality, as there appears to be only a handful ever made fit to serve as broadcast turntables in Australian radio stations. To say that I was scared of this restoration was an understatement, especially since it wasn't mine. So let's rewind a few months. Fred, the father of one of my colleagues and friend, got in touch with me because he knew that I would be interested in this turntable. Fred has a sharp eye, spotting this turntable on a Facebook Marketplace ad. He just caught a glimpse of it, but he recognised it. He was as excited as a kid in a candy store, being a lifelong vintage hi-fi enthusiast and collector. And as you do, I had struck up a friendship with Fred. When he said it needed servicing, I jumped at the opportunity to do it, and later regretted it, as I don't often service hi-fi equipment for other people. It's usually just for myself. And knowing that this was almost one of a kind, I was deathly afraid of something going wrong. So I went to his office, uninstalled the unit as best I could, and crudely cut away the top of the cabinet so I could use it as a template later and making my own plinth for it. The Silex is such a unique turntable. It's made up of a top chassis, with the heavy platter being suspended by a spider, a 3-point spider underneath. This is in turn pulled by a very unique combination of a belt and an idler wheel, not unlike the Thorin's 124. I start by giving it a good look over and inspecting it, then proceed to remove the spider that holds the platter. As I suspected, the foam and rubber holding this spider was all but crumbling away. The foam had turned to dust and the rubber was cracking. I would have to find a suitable replacement or get creative. While I was there, I turned my attention to the main bearing. I had seen this type of bearing before on other transcription turntables. The height of the platter can be adjusted easily just by turning this screw. However, it was on there tight. I tried lubrication, I tried heat, but nothing seemed to work. And I wasn't willing to force this. I'd broken cast iron before. I knew there were others out there in Australia, but they were far and few between. And as I said previously, this didn't belong to me, and I wasn't willing to risk it. So I proceeded to clean it internally as best I could, with isopropyl alcohol and swabs. Doing the same to the spindle and the ball bearing. Which I noticed had some rough spots on it. Something of this caliber deserved a brand new bearing. So I measured it up and ordered a replacement. Next was the motor itself. I started by disassembling the spider that held the motor in place. I had high hopes for these grommets that they were going to be okay. In a sick sort of a way, working on idler wheels is my favourite part of any of these turntables. Don't ask me why, there's just something truly satisfying about cleaning up an idler wheel. Maybe it's because that all of these points of contact that turn a turntable need to be at their very best to avoid any sort of wow and flutter, speed fluctuations, and outside noise. As usual, I clean everything with isopropyl alcohol and swabs. The rubber part hits the pulley on the motor and the belt rides in this groove, which was the filthiest of all. I had to get creative to get all the muck out of it. And where I deem it safe enough, I'm not afraid to dress down spindles and bearings with some fine grit sandpaper. I continued on by removing the spider from the main motor and set about disassembling the motor for repair. Pretty standard 4-pole motor with a rotor, top and bottom bearings. With no grub screw to easily take off the pulley, I got cold feet. I probably could have used the old 2-spoon trick or 2 flathead screwdrivers and wedged it off, maybe even with a bit of heat. Again, I just wasn't willing to risk it. I decided that I would clean it as best I could. Oiling all the bearings as I went. Time to pop out the first set of rubbers. Although I didn't find an exact replacement, this sort of grommet holding motors in place from this era are very common. I was able to find something fairly close to the original that I thought would do exactly the same job. It would be better than leaving the old ones. I oil up the main bearing. After getting a good look inside the main bearing, I realised that the ball bearing was riding flush. I decided that a Delrin thrust pad, which was so often employed in other turntables, was a good idea. Don't forget to wash the belt. It needed a good clean, but it definitely didn't feel supple and elastic like it should. I was really keen to preserve these spider grommets, so I used a trick I'd learned many years ago by soaking them in rubber rejuvenator. It usually really plumps them up, and it did do the trick. But there was just one that was already cracked and too far gone. After doing a bit of research online, I stumbled across Jack RPM from the StereoNet forums, who had the ingenious idea of using eyedropper rubbers to suspend that spider. So I thought I'd give it a go. What did I have to lose? So far, so good. They fit there nicely, and the motor seemed to hang off of it. Now it was time to do some lateral thinking of my own with the spider. What other famous suspended turntables had I worked on? You guessed it, the acoustic research turntables. I still had a set of old springs from a leftover XB project. And what do you know? They fit in like a glove. I cut some extra foam to dampen it at the base, getting them all installed. When the new bearings arrived, I was ready to fire this thing up, and as they say, this is where the rubber hits the road. Just like other suspended turntables, having the springs there also allows me to level off the platter. Although the first thing I noticed was that the platter sat higher than it originally did. Oh yeah, James, don't forget about the belt, you dummy, which is an absolute pitter to get on. Here goes nothing. What's going on? But as I suspected, the belt was a little slack. Once it was moving though, it was fine. I gave the motor a good knock just to align the bearings and let it run in for a while. Having a stepped tapered pulley meant that this control knob would adjust its speed depending on which way you turned it. So it raises the idler wheel up and down on that tapered step. And my initial speed tests were good. It looked stable. I would have to do something about that belt though. At least now I could turn my attention to creating the plinth. I quickly realised that it had been a long time since making anything out of timber. My woodworking skills were a little rusty. I decided that I needed something that was going to look good, but not show up any of my imperfections. And in the back of my mind, I'd kept something that Fred had told me about his son. His son really hated the look of the turntable. That old school radiogram, 60s hammer tone sort of look. I decided to use an 18mm thick piece of quality plywood as the top plate. And after cutting out the template, I could do my first dry run. The original plinth was thin, and this is because there's such little room between the spider and the top chassis. So I knew I would have to rebait the areas where the spider landed. Another dry run, and I almost forgot about that tone arm collar. Another dry run. Then onto the sides, which I used Tasmanian oak for. I kept it simple, glue and nails, because by now, I decided that I was going to paint this. I rounded off all the edges to give it that industrial look and to make the painting process easier. Then I used some good filler to try and fill in as much of that grain as possible. I started with my white primer and did a good 4 coats of it. I stumbled across some cement paint, some textured paint. This one was sandstone, and I thought I was going to be done with that, to really give it that sort of sandstone, concrete plinth look. But the colour just wasn't quite right. Maybe a terracotta would have been better. But then I remembered I had some leftover beige spray paint, and I am a beige fanatic. I thought that would contrast well with the grey hammer tone of the Orpheus Silex. The end was in sight. I was approaching the home stretch. I felt good, nervous, and almost done with this project. I was mentally and physically exhausted. So I took a break to do some good research about the history of the turntable. And boy, was that hard. There is not a lot of information out there at all. As I stated at the beginning of this video, George Morgan invented this turntable sometime in the 50s. He lodged his US, Canadian and UK patents. I think at the time, in the 50s, there were a few really smart people out there that were experimenting with turntable suspension systems. If we were to take the patents by face value, then it would almost certainly appear that the Scott 710 turntable was the winner there. Supposedly, the Orpheus Silex was in such high demand back then that they just couldn't keep up with production. My guess is that radio stations simply turned to other alternatives like the Garage and then the Techniques. Assembly time. Oh yeah, did I mention that the tone arm fitted was an Orpheus SMG 212, 12-inch arm? These alone go for over $1,000 here in Australia. As per Fred's instructions, he did not want to plug in a separate power cable or phono cables. He preferred it hardwired to the plinth. Nothing fancy here, just some good old-fashioned point-to-point wiring. Soldering tone arm wires. Probably my least favourite thing to do in the world. And so, I didn't film it, but you can see my scorch marks there. Everything checked out with the multimeter, and I was happy. Before going any further, I addressed one matter that had been niggling me before. I attached some extra nuts and washers on the top of the eyedropper grommets, as you can see there. As it turns out, belts are available online, just not in Australia. Go figure. I found replacements in the UK and America. I got this one from LP Gear. On the website, it was advertised as a black belt and looked a lot closer to the original, but this was the one I got when it came. The diameter is definitely smaller than the original 3mm, but boy did it feel good. There was only one way to find out. I ran it in for a good few days and enjoyed the fruits of my labour, knowing that I might never see this beauty again once I took it back to Fred. Nah, just kidding. We'd have visitation rights, wouldn't we, Orpheus? Right? I cobbled together some components in my living room. Space was becoming an issue with this hobby. And tested the speed again. I was very impressed with a turntable that was over 60 years old. Needless to say, Fred was ecstatic. You can see it here next to his Garage, which funnily enough, still dwarfs it. And he ended up taking it to his favourite place, the office, with the rest of his cool gear that I envy and want so badly. I hope this video is a big help to anyone who's getting started on restoring this amazing turntable. And as always, the comments are open to anyone with more information about the history of the turntable or George Morgan or their thoughts on what they would use when it comes to the suspension of the turntable and any techniques that they have used with great success. Bye for now.